Good morning. Our opening thought is an excerpt from a poem by William Matthews. The book and the poem are called A Happy Childhood. He'll remember like a prayer how his mother made breakfast for him every morning before he trudged out to snip the papers free, just as his mother will remember she felt guilty never to wake up with him to give him breakfast. It was cream of wheat they always or never had together. It turns out you are the story of your childhood, and you're under constant revision, like a lonely folk tale whose invisible folks are all the selves you've been, lifelong shadows in fog, gray glimmers at dusk. And each of these selves had a childhood it traded for love and grudged to give away, now lost irretrievably, in storage like a set of dishes from which no food, no cream of wheat, no rabbit in mustard sauce, not even a single raspberry can be eaten until the afterlife, which is only childhood in its last disguise, all radiance or all humiliation. And so it is forfeit a final time. There's no truth about your childhood, though there's a story, yours to tend, like a fire or a garden. Make it a good one, since you'll have to live it out, and all its revisions, so long as you all shall live. Our reading comes from Jamie Figueroa, and it's in an online magazine called Emergence. They publish a print edition too, but you can see it online. And Jamie is an indigenous person. I don't know which tribe or tradition, but this is an excerpt from a much longer piece talking about trying to live in Arizona in an area with very poor access to water and also accessing indigenous wisdom from grandmothers and wise women who are around her in that southwestern area. You should also know that she is a writing teacher, and so this part of these excerpts that I've pulled from the essay are mainly centered around her writing class. There are many kinds of story. A story can simply be a thing, the way dominant culture has turned a river into a thing. A skunk, a stone, a sparrow, all into things. A black man, a brown woman. Or a story can be living. It can be an activating force that alters vibration, transcends time, and shifts not only how we perceive but our shared reality itself. A presence you can feel drawing close to you, taking hold of your hand, pressing its lips to your ear. Moving just beyond the limits of our mental constraints, it is an ever-shifting spirit that penetrates our cells and the infinite possibilities and combinations of beingness encoded there. Together, the story and we, each one of us, become something altogether new. The previous fall, during a fiction writing workshop I was teaching at the Institute of American Indian Arts, my class became impassioned with stories of the future. Students spoke to the futuristic movies and novels they cherished for good reason, many of them iconic or classic, apocalyptic stories of the future, dystopian motifs. Not far from where we find ourselves now. For some of us, I'd say emotionally on point. Prophecies, predictions. At some point, between building on the foundational elements of craft, reading short stories, and considering interviews with contemporary indigenous writers, class came to a halt. Together we wondered, as writers, as story makers, about how we were creating the future in our work, and thereby our own future off the page. There are those who have prophecies within their own traditional knowledge systems. Then there are those of us in a lifelong process of repair and rematriation with our traditional knowledge systems who are creating our own prophecies. The voltage of imagining that power pricked down our necks. Your stories can and will not only change your own lives, but they have the potential to change our shared realities. What kind of world do you want to inhabit? What are the stories that will make it so? Can we even imagine such a thing? Our pens seem to stand at attention, waiting, daring us. All causes have effects. All choices have consequences. Words and stories have impact. I would be safe to say we can agree on this. Sherry Mitchell, a Penobscot Indigenous rights attorney, educator, author, and the founding director of the Land Peace Foundation, unpacked it even more. Sound creates vibrations that transcend time and space. Inherent in my freedom are responsibilities. As a human being, I am a keeper of the balance between the rights and responsibilities of my being. As a writer, I'm fashioning reality. What are the details of that world? What am I responsible for? Would I want to inhabit the stories I create? Writing is very much ceremony, Dr. Renda Madrigal said, linking it directly with active imagination as a way to cultivate our intuition. She continued, we have to imagine things for them to happen. We have to imagine differently. I don't know how people can get through great tragedy and loss without a story. The key to what the world can be is in the imagination. That's where we're going to find it. There was and is no way I could explicitly direct my students on how to create their own prophetic stories. I'm unable to determine their details. Truthfully, on many days, under the weight of my individual struggle, I am desperate to find my own. What I return to, the remembering, the naming, the details, the grief. It's the grief that births me. My ability to imagine the future I need and that my family needs depends on my ability to keep returning to myself and to trust the knowing seated there. Can we claim that the cure is in the wound, that we can enter there, face it, claim it, and transcend it? Imagine beyond it and restore ourselves. Dance and sing the next iteration as we bear our scars and our ancestors' scars, our earned inheritance as if adornment. Dare we? Can we restory ourselves and rebirth the world? Well, once upon a time, there was a girl who was born with green skin and a full set of sharp teeth. Her first act was to bite off the fingertip of the midwife who thoughtlessly stuck her finger in the infant's mouth. The girl had a skin allergy to water and cleaned herself with oil. She was rejected and bullied by the other children and most adults. As a young adult, she befriended talking animals and people known as Winkies, and she joined with them to fight the oppressive policies of a dictator. In response, she was vilified by the political elites and branded the Wicked Witch of the West. Recognize it now? Gregory Maguire's take on L. Frank Baum's book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, Maguire's book Wicked also became a hit musical. You've probably heard of it. If you've seen the show but not read the book, I should warn you the book is much darker and more political than the musical. Highly recommend both of them. But both of them take a story that most Americans thought they knew and turn it on its head, showing Glinda as a shallow, avaricious social climber, Elphaba, aka Wicked Witch, as a complex but well-intentioned fighter for the liberation of oppressed minorities, and the wizard as a ruthless and selfish dictator. Like so much of our lives, the story depends on your point of view. Is Elphaba the hero or the Wicked Witch? Who gets to decide? You may be thinking, those are just stories. But stories are how we live, how we make sense of the world. In fact, some anthropologists say that our human narrative sense emerged early in our evolution as our ancestors learned to track prey by understanding the stories told by animal tracks. Cave paintings, such as the ones at Chauvet, France, demonstrate that humans were telling stories to each other more than 30,000 years ago. It's one thing to tell a story about a deer you hunted or the traffic jam you battled on your way home from work. And quite another to become aware of the stories that you are telling yourself about yourself. So just take a moment now. We're here. Think about it. What's your story? What story do you believe you are in? We all have more than one. So there's the professional resume story you would give in a job interview. I was born in Lubbock, graduated from Texas Tech, and then attended graduate school at Ohio State. My first real job was as a technical and marketing writer for an asbestos consulting firm, and then I went to a bigger environmental firm. That's one aspect of my life, but it doesn't tell you anything about who I am or what I believe or what forces shaped me. So what other kinds of stories might you have about yourself? Maybe a religious narrative. I grew up in the Disciples of Christ Church, or my family never attended church, but I was always hungry for something bigger. And so I would always ask my friends to spend the night on Saturday and then go to church with them. Is there a story that you tell your spouse or your closest friend about how you turned out to be the person that you are now? Maybe you had a parent who was absent or cruel, or you measure every action by trying to be the opposite of that. Or maybe you were a fortunate one who had a loving, open-minded, supportive family, and they gave you a strong home base to adventure from. Have you ever thought about what stories you tell yourself about your life and how you turned out to be the person you are in the place that you are? Why are you in Denison, Texas? Maybe you have narratives that are below the level of conscious awareness. And in that case, it might take a little quiet time and inquiry, some journaling to uncover them. I remember doing a board workshop one time where the facilitator presented a square divided into quadrants to represent what we know internally versus what we show to the world. The first quadrant is all the things that you know about yourself and everyone else sees. Are you tall or short? Do you have an accent? Do you tend to talk first or hang back? The second square is your internal world, the things that you keep to yourself, the struggles you hide. The third square is the one that I found a little terrifying. These are the things that everyone sees but you. These are the things everyone else knows about you, They may even assume that you know them because they are so obvious, but you don't. No one ever mentions them because they think it's so obvious. These are the things that you don't know you're doing. These are the things that make me shudder when I see a video of myself. And unfortunately, the only way to uncover these traits or habits is to ask someone. In fact, there's an entire business model. There's a company that has approached me numerous times about, to know if you're a good manager, we need to talk to your employees and do one-on-one interviews with all of your employees and ask them what they really think, because they're never going to tell you. So this is where our unconscious story shows itself to the world. The fourth square is all the things that are unconscious to you and invisible to everyone else. I'm sure that there's a psychiatrist who finds this part fascinating, and there is a lot to uncover there. That's a big job. That's for somebody else to unpack. But it is worth taking some quiet time to think through your own story. You could even write it down or, speak it into your phone voice app, or better yet, tell your cat. Most cats are very patient with life stories, I've found, and they don't even care if you're the hero or the victim, as long as you fill their bowl at the end of the story. So what turns a bunch of stuff that just happened into a story? Every story has 5 elements: a protagonist or a main character. Guess what? This is you. Are you the hero, the victim, the villain? Or, like most of us, are you just complicated? And all of those things. Desire. In the story of your life, there will be many desires. I love this passage from Ellen Bryant Voigt. There's a poem she wrote called Blue Ridge. She's talking about watching fireworks with her friend. And he says, my children would have loved this show. And I think how the young are truly boring, unvaried as they are by the deep scar of doubt, the constant afterimage of regret. They don't yet know that this is so much work, scraping from the self its multiple desires. We all have multiple desires. But which were the critical ones? Which were the desires that have shaped your decisions that landed you in Denison, Texas in the spring of 2023? Desires are complicated, and they often conflict with one another, and they drive everything we do one way or another. Third element, a barrier. This could be a person. Far too often it's a person. Could be a circumstance. Maybe family didn't have enough money for you to go straight to college after high school. It could be anything. It could be a failure. I tried to do this and I just was no good at it. Or I failed the first time and said, that's it. By the time we're adults, we've all faced many, many barriers, many failures. So the question is, which ones shaped who you became? Which roads were blocked? And then fourth, actions, events, reactions. This is the plot, really. How did you respond to those critical barriers, the blocked roads? In your life, where were the critical forks in the road? And here's something that's really interesting. When you go back and you look at the trends and the themes, and the trends in your life and the choices that you've made, are there themes that emerge? Is there some common element that comes back again and again? That's important. Finally, in a story, there's always change. Something changes. Something's learned, something's gained, something's lost. And remember, even giving up is a change. You're deciding not to act on a desire. That's a change. These elements shape every story, not just the polished ones that writers and filmmakers and ad writers tell. Character, desire or goal, a barrier, actions and change, or a realization. They shape your story too. And here's the good news. Recognizing them allows you to take control. Now, stories have tellers and a point of view. And it can be hard to think about your story from inside the main character's head. Are you being honest with yourself? Or are you what your high school English teacher called an unreliable narrator? It's important to guard against becoming Humbert in Lolita. You may remember him. He's walking around trying to get sympathy for his actions and ignoring the damage that he's doing, ignoring the effects that he has on other people. And even if you're not, however unintentionally, doing damage to other people, you can try to be aware of how those recurring themes that you're identifying might point out where you're contributing to your own bad outcomes. So I remember my best friend in high school. She could never hold a job for more than a couple of months. And she would call me up to complain about how terrible the boss was. The boss was always mean, always too harsh, never fair, wouldn't let her make personal phone calls at work, kept trying to tell her she had to, do things. I looked at all these very different jobs, all these very different bosses, and even at age 16, I thought, you're the only common thread here. It can't always be everyone else. So if you look at your story and you see a thread emerging, you might take a moment to consider who's the common thread? What is that theme that's emerging and how are you contributing to it? Are you doing something or not doing something that contributes? Maybe it's not everyone else picking fights. Maybe you have a quick temper. Or maybe you need to stand up for yourself and be willing to walk away when someone is taking advantage of you. Or maybe you look at this and you say, wow, look at that. I have brought a sense of humor to even the most tragic events in my life and be happy. These themes can be good things too. They don't necessarily need to be things you have to fix. But after you've taken time to sit down and think about your story, what if you're not so happy with the choices you've made and the role that you've played? Here's the good news. The curtain isn't down yet. Rachel Aviv wrote in The New Yorker just this month about a philosophy professor named Agnes Callard. Callard's book, Aspiration, argues that people can embark on a path toward a destination, a new way of being a person that they can't yet see or understand, a process that she calls aspiration. When aspirants make decisions, they're guided by the possibility of a future self that does not yet exist. They imitate mentors or competitors, risking pretension because they understand that they haven't yet made room for another way of seeing themselves in the world. In other words, once you identify a change that you want to make, a better self, it's okay to proceed, even if you can't fully see or understand what it will be like to be that changed person. You can fake it till you make it, as the saying goes. And I have to say, when I was going into high school, I was the bookish, shy, not popular, scrawny little kid in junior high. And going into high school, a friend of mine who was a year older and had been at the high school said, "You know, what's really scary about going to the high school is it's all new people," because there were multiple junior highs feeding into the much larger high school. She said, "I hated it because I didn't know everybody anymore. And nobody there knew me." And I thought, nobody knows me. I'm going to get to this high school and I can pretend to be popular and outgoing and not so nerdy and take my nose out of a book and actually walk up and talk to people, which was kind of terrifying. But I did it. And it was awkward. This was not a smooth success story transition. This was me as a 14-year-old going way over the top with trying to be friendly. If there was anybody whose name I knew, I would wave and greet them from a long distance away, just trying to be a person I had never been before. It was awkward. It was uncomfortable. I missed the mark so many times. And, I overshot and pulled back and overshot and pulled. Anyway, it was a messy couple of years, but it was a good thing. And in the end, I did end up being a different person coming out of high school than the person who had entered high school, which is frankly what growing up is all about, right? But I know what that feels like, to just say, I want to be a different kind of a person, and deciding to do it. It is terrifying, and you will feel awkward, and you will not be good at it at first. And that's okay. It is okay. Turns out people are a lot more tolerant of us than I think we give them credit for, especially once they get out of high school. Because let's face it, high school is the jungle. So for one thing that you can change, let's take a really quick look at the trait of optimism. Social scientists tell us that this trait of optimism to pessimism, there's sort of a scale, is a pretty stable trait in human personality. Most people stay within a certain baseline, and their outlook will move up a little or down a little depending on their circumstances, but it returns to a pretty stable baseline. And there's a psychiatrist named Martin Seligman who has studied optimism extensively, and he came to believe that optimism can and should be cultivated. He found that it springs from a belief that we have control over our lives and over outcomes, and that we can make things better. You probably heard of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. It's really the same kind of a concept. Do you believe that you can be better and make your life better? So Seligman said to a reporter just last year, optimism and pessimism, it turns out, are all about the stories we tell ourselves after both our successes and our failures. So ask yourself this: what kind of stories have you told yourself over the last few years? Which is a stretch of time that even the most practiced optimist may have found challenging. Have you, as I have, tended to look at current events and see the world unraveling, the future crumpling in a heap at your feet? Do you picture a path that leads to utter catastrophe, to dystopia, civil war, repressive theocracy, nuclear attack? That's called catastrophizing. The trick is to recognize that there's more than one path. We can influence outcomes, and the catastrophe is not inevitable. With some effort and practice, we can alter our balance of optimistic and pessimistic thinking. Seligman says it's now a robust, replicated finding that you can teach people to, for example, argue against their most catastrophic thoughts with reasonable evidence and move pessimism into optimism. The trick is noticing when you're doing it, when you're generalizing from the most negative events in your life and dismissing the good things. Oh, I messed everything up. Oh, that person gave me a compliment, but, they're just being nice. They don't really believe that. Accept the compliments. Find the good things. It's a specific thought pattern, and it is something that you can address once you've noticed it at work in your own story. There's someone I really admire who does optimism well. Her name is Katharine Hayhoe, and she is a climate scientist and activist. She was at Texas Tech until this year when she moved to Dallas to be with the Nature Conservancy full-time. She published a book last year called Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope. She also publishes a weekly email with 3 sections: the good news, the not so good news, and what you can do. Simple and brilliant. Her good news is real, it's not greenwashing, and she doesn't pretend that there won't be a cost. But she points us toward hope. She is someone who has looked at her desires, her barriers, such as living in a conservative world where too many people dismiss climate change or care more about making money, and she's made choices that can change us all. Dr. Hayhoe is obviously driven by purpose, and we know that people with a strong sense of purpose lead longer, happier lives, even if their purpose is something simple, like tending a beautiful garden, or feeding stray cats, or being a good dad. Saving the world from runaway climate change is an excellent purpose, but it's not the only one. And remember, a purpose is not the same thing as a goal. Goal is something small you can complete and check off of your to-do list. In the story of your life, you may have moved from goal to goal. But what's the purpose underlying them all? Is there a thread that stitches your story together? Have you found it yet? If not, this is the perfect time. And just imagine, what if you look at your story and decide to take the next act in an entirely new direction? What if you consciously choose a purpose, work to cultivate a more optimistic worldview, and accidentally change the world? Jamie Figueroa, whose essay we heard in the reading, says, "A story can be an activating force that alters vibration, transcends time, and shifts not only how we perceive, but our shared reality itself." Your stories can and will change your own lives, but they have the potential to change our shared realities. What kind of world do you want to inhabit? What are the stories that will make it so? You've been telling yourself a story about your life, consciously or unconsciously, for your whole life. Imagine the power of making that story conscious, seizing control of your own narrative. When you do that, you're not only changing your own life. Our stories are all intertwined, entangled in the interdependent web of existence where imagination has power. Hope has power. Choices have power. If you want to live in a better story, create it. You're the author. As my favorite Doctor Who said, "We're all stories in the end. Just make it a good one, eh?"